When he leaned in during our first dance and whispered, "I'll leave you anyway," he thought it was just another private threat. He didn't know his lapel mic was still live. He didn't know the entire room was about to hear the real man I'd been living with for years. And no, I'm telling you this from a place where I'm finally happy.
My name is Tiana Monroe, and this is the story of how I stopped protecting a man who never protected me and chose to expose the truth on the day he thought he owned my silence. I was 37 when Malik Hargrove walked into my life looking like the answer to a prayer I barely still believed in. I had just left a long, draining relationship and had thrown myself into my work at a small education nonprofit, convincing myself I didn't need more than stability and purpose. Malik was the opposite of everything I thought I was ready for. Confident to the point of arrogance, charming in a way that felt rehearsed, and so adored by his family that I could practically see the glow around him when he moved through a room. He made me feel chosen, and after years of being treated like an afterthought, that alone was powerful enough to quiet my doubts. The first time he pulled out that line, "You know I can walk away any time," we were only 3 months into dating. He said it with a crooked smirk after I questioned why he hadn't answered my calls for half a day. It sounded like a joke, something tossed off casually between adults who didn't take themselves too seriously. I told myself I was overreacting when my chest tightened. He wrapped his arms around me, kissed the top of my head, and said, "Relax, T, I'm here now, aren't I?" And just like that, the discomfort folded itself neatly under affection. But small remarks don't stay small when they repeat. Over time, they form their own architecture, shaping the space you live in until you can't remember what it felt like to breathe freely before it began. Malik repeated that phrase the way some men repeat, "I love you," as if it were a reminder of balance in the relationship, a truth he never wanted me to forget. Each time I asserted myself about a boundary, a feeling, a plan, he leaned back with that half smile and said, "Careful, T, you know I can walk away anytime." I laughed along because the alternative was taking it seriously, and taking it seriously meant acknowledging that the man I loved believed my fear of being left was his leverage. When he proposed, he said it again. We were on a rooftop arranged by his friend who worked in event planning. Strings of lights framed the skyline, soft music played from hidden speakers, and a small circle of his family waited nearby to capture the moment. Malik knelt, opened the ring box, and whispered, "Don't start crying, T. You know I can walk away any time, but I'm choosing not to." And they laughed, his mother, his sister, even 2 cousins I had just met. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, a mixture of joy and humiliation, so tangled I couldn't pull them apart. I nodded, said yes, and let him slide the ring onto my finger while everyone cheered, pretending I didn't feel a bruise forming where the joke landed. His mother, Gloria, welcomed me with a politeness that felt like a test. The first time I visited their home, she looked me over and said, "You carry yourself well. That's important in this family." Then she asked about my upbringing, my parents' occupations, and the neighborhood I grew up in with the precision of someone appraising a house before deciding whether to buy it. Her smile was wide, but her approval was conditional, and I felt it tightening like a belt around my ribs every time she watched me speak. Malik didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care to. His sister, Danielle, was more open in her judgments. She'd scroll through Malik's old photos and comment on his exes, who was prettier, who had more polish, who dressed better. She wasn't cruel on the surface. Her words were dipped in sugar, sweet enough to swallow, but sharp enough to cut on the way down. "You're different," she'd say. Malik always dated women who looked like they belonged on magazine covers, but maybe he needed a change. She said it with a smile, but I heard what lived beneath it. "You're not enough, but you'll do." Malik, ever the performer, seemed to enjoy it, the teasing, the comparisons, the quiet undermining. Whenever I stiffened or tried to deflect a comment, he rested his hand on my back and murmured, "Don't take everything so seriously. You know I can walk away any time." That line became the punctuation of our relationship, a period at the end of every disagreement, a full stop to every attempt I made to be heard. His tone was light, but the message was a weight that pressed deeper each time he said it. Still, there were moments when I clung to the idea that I was overthinking things. Malik could be gentle in private. He remembered details, the story of my mother working 2 jobs, the way my father taught me to be meticulous with my words, the years I spent rebuilding myself after a partner who made me feel invisible. Malik asked about my dreams, praised my work, and said he admired my strength. Those moments were strong enough to overshadow the subtler signs of danger, the way a bright light masks cracks in the wall. A month before the wedding, Malik's family hosted a large barbecue, inviting relatives I hadn't met yet. Gloria handed me a stack of napkins and pointed me toward the folding tables, while Malik drifted away with the men, laughing and slapping backs like he was hosting royalty. I spent most of the afternoon arranging food, refilling trays, and trying to smile when people called me the helper. When one uncle joked that Malik finally picked someone who knows her place, Malik didn't correct him. He just grinned and raised his cup. In that moment, something in me pulled taut, a string drawn to its limit. But then Keisha, his quiet cousin, walked over and murmured, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone here." Her voice was soft, but her eyes held understanding, and for a moment I felt less alone. Later that night, when I confronted Malik gently about the comment, he shrugged. "T, you read too much into things. My family jokes. Don't take it personal. Besides," he leaned back on the couch, arm draped lazily over his knee, "you know I can walk away anytime, so stop creating problems where there aren't any." He said it like he was tired of reminding me. And that was the moment I realized he enjoyed the power his words held, not because he intended to leave, but because he knew I feared being left. My past made that fear sharper. I had spent 5 years with a man who treated me like a placeholder, someone he could come home to when his real ambitions didn't pan out. When that relationship finally broke, when I learned he had introduced me to colleagues as someone keeping me company, I told myself I would never again tolerate disrespect disguised as humor. But with Malik, disrespect wore a nicer suit. It smiled. It kissed my forehead. It held my waist while reminding me I was replaceable. As the wedding day approached, the tension grew thicker. Every time I voiced an opinion about the ceremony or guest list, he countered with that familiar threat disguised as a joke. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His power lived in indifference, in the ease with which he implied he could disappear. And I, stupidly hopeful, convinced myself that if I just stayed calm, stayed gracious, stayed agreeable, things would shift once we were married. That he would soften. That his family would embrace me. That I would feel like a partner instead of a fragile ornament they could reposition at will. But the truth settled slowly, like dust on glass. I was losing pieces of myself, one quiet surrender at a time. And Malik didn't mind, because every surrendered piece became another place he could step without resistance. And the worst part was this. I let him. A week before the wedding, Malik's family gathered at a private lounge they rented for a celebration dinner. I arrived a few minutes early, still adjusting the neckline of my dress, hoping the night would smooth some of the tension that had been tightening around my ribs like invisible wire. The room was warm, gold-lit, filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and expensive wine. Gloria waved me over with a rehearsed smile that hovered just above polite. Danielle hugged me lightly, as if she were avoiding wrinkles, then whispered, "Just relax tonight. Big events stress Malik out when his partner gets emotional." It was the kind of remark meant to sound supportive while planting a blade. I swallowed it and smiled. Malik arrived 40 minutes late, stepping into the room with the swagger of someone certain the world would keep spinning until he arrived to push it. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened, and he smelled like a cocktail of cologne and something floral that didn't belong to me. His eyes flicked toward me, amused. "Why the face, T? You act like I'm your kid showing up past curfew." I leaned in, trying to keep my voice controlled as I said I'd been calling him for an hour. He clinked his glass against mine and said loudly enough for half the room to hear, "Relax. If you keep tripping like this, I'll leave you anyway. Upgrade while I'm at it." Laughter rolled across the tables like a wave. Gloria shook her head, smiling indulgently. Danielle covered her mouth, giggling like it was the best punchline she'd heard all year. Heat flooded my cheeks, that familiar burn of humiliation that feels like standing under a spotlight with no lines to cover you. I tried to escape to the restroom with dignity, but my steps were too quick. The bright mirror reflected a woman who seemed to be shrinking from her own life. Veil trial pinned into her curls from an earlier fitting, mascara smudged at the corner of her eye, breath shaky from being blindsided again. I braced my hands on the sink and whispered to myself, "Respect is the last thing you let them take." But it felt like I was saying it to a stranger. By the time I returned to the table, Malik had slipped seamlessly back into host mode, pouring drinks for his cousins, laughing with his uncles, retelling old stories that painted him as the family's golden boy. He barely noticed me slip into my seat. When I didn't immediately mirror his smile, he slid his arm around my waist, squeezing harder than necessary. "Don't make it a thing," he murmured, low and sharp. "Everyone's having a good time. Don't ruin it." His fingers dug into my side, and the message beneath the touch was clear: behave. Dinner moved forward in a haze. Gloria offered toasts about strong men who choose partners who understand them. One of Malik's older uncles raised a glass and said, "Marriage works best when the woman stays steady and doesn't nag about the little things." Laughter again. Eyes turned toward me again. And Malik, instead of shielding me, nudged my leg under the table like I should be laughing too. I felt my jaw tighten as another small piece of me folded inward. The second blow of the night came subtler, but it cut deeper. Toward the end of the evening, Danielle pulled out a small gift bag, grinning as she handed it to me. "A little something for your honeymoon," she said. Inside was a white satin robe embroidered with the words, "Mrs. Hargrove, property of Malik." Gloria burst into delighted applause. Malik threw his head back and laughed, saying, "Well, she better remember it. You know she gets ideas." I forced a smile, but the words stitched across the fabric glared at me like a warning label. In that moment, humiliation wasn't loud. It was quiet, slow, a drip that hollowed me out from the inside. As dessert was served, several of Malik's cousins began retelling a story about his ex, a woman named Brielle, who had broken things off after an argument about boundaries. "Malik doesn't like women who talk too much," one cousin joked. "Tiana's better. She knows when to be quiet." More laughter. Malik didn't correct them. He just sipped his drink and watched my reaction with a detached amusement, as if he were studying me, checking whether I would crack or stay composed. When the check arrived, Malik stood and clinked his glass again, raising it toward me. "To my bride," he said, "who forgives quickly, forgets easily, and doesn't sweat the small stuff." The room cheered. I smiled because every gaze was on me, and because walking out would have been treated as a tantrum, not a boundary. But inside, something cold slid into place. It was the first moment I felt the beginnings of the decision that would eventually carry me through the wedding doors with more purpose than love. When we finally reached the parking lot, I stopped beside my car and said quietly, "You embarrassed me tonight." He stared at me as if I'd announced something absurd. "Embarrassed you? Tiana, you're dramatic. You know I'm just joking. You make everything heavy." I told him jokes shouldn't leave bruises. He rolled his eyes, stepped closer, and whispered, "Careful. You know I can walk away any time." His breath smelled like whiskey and citrus. His face was inches from mine, softening only when he saw the exhaustion in my eyes. "Don't cry," he added, almost annoyed. "It's really not that deep." In that moment, I felt myself split. The woman who wanted to be loved, and the woman who knew she was being diminished. The woman who kept trying to make a toxic situation feel breathable, and the woman who knew she could suffocate trying. I looked at Malik, handsome, adored, confident, and realized he had no intention of ever seeing me fully. He only wanted someone who could reflect his shine without demanding any of her own. On the drive home, silence filled the car like fog. I kept replaying his voice echoing over the laughter, the robe with the embroidered words, the jokes about women who talk too much, the unspoken rule that I should be grateful to be chosen at all. Every memory flickered like a match, lighting a heat that no longer felt like shame. It felt like awakening. If pain was a threshold, I had crossed mine. Later that night, lying awake beside Malik while he scrolled through his phone, I felt clarity break through the haze. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't oversensitive. I wasn't asking too much. I had been silenced so slowly, I mistook it for partnership. And all I could think, staring at the ceiling, was, what would happen if just once he heard himself the way I heard him? What would happen if the man who warned he could walk away any time suddenly found himself standing alone in a room filled with the consequences of his own words? I didn't know it then, but the seed of my revenge, clean, quiet, devastating, was planted right there in the dark. The morning after that dinner, I woke up with a strange stillness in my chest, the kind that comes when your body realizes something long before your mind catches up. Malik was already dressed, humming while adjusting his tie in the mirror. He glanced at me briefly and asked, "We good?" in that casual, dismissive tone that assumed agreement, not dialogue. I knew exactly how the conversation would unfold if I answered honestly. The jokes, the eye roll, the threat that he could walk away anytime. So instead I said, "We're fine," even though something inside me refused to sit back down in the place where I'd kept it quiet for months. At work, my eyes drifted across emails without reading a word. All I saw was the dinner replaying in my mind, his smirk, the robe embroidered with property of Malik, the way the room erupted in laughter at my expense. I felt again the burn of humiliation crawling up my neck, the sense of being observed, not supported. And for the first time, I didn't ask myself why Malik treated me this way. I asked why I had allowed it. His jokes weren't harmless. They were conditioning, a slow erosion of boundaries disguised as humor. My breathing tightened as I realized something crucial. If he was willing to speak to me like that in front of his family, he truly believed I had no power to hold him accountable. Around lunchtime, I opened a final logistics email from our videographer. It listed camera placements, timing for vows, and audio setup. Then I saw it. Lapel mic for groom, live channel accessible through DJ board. I reread that line 3 times. Malik loved microphones. He loved being amplified, adored, performed for. He loved attention when it made him look generous, charming, in control. It didn't even occur to him that a microphone could work both ways. Suddenly, the idea came together, not as revenge at first, but as clarity. If he wouldn't hear me, he could hear himself. That evening, I drove alone to the venue for the final walkthrough. Malik texted that he was too busy dealing with real responsibilities, so I handled it. When I stepped into the dimly lit ballroom, workers were adjusting floral arches and lifting speakers into place. At the back, the DJ, Marcus, stood beside a console testing transitions. Our videographer, Russell, adjusted a tripod. They both looked up as I approached. Marcus smiled. "You must be Tiana. We're just running audio checks." Russell handed me the small wireless mic that would clip onto Malik's jacket. "This picks up everything he says," he explained. "We keep it muted unless needed, so background chatter doesn't go through the speakers." I held the tiny device, feeling its weight, insignificant except for what it could carry. "Is it possible," I asked carefully, "to send his mic through the speakers if I needed that?" Marcus hesitated, intrigued rather than suspicious. "Well, not by default, but I can unmute that channel anytime. You'd need to give me a signal." My fingers drifted to the pendant around my neck, a small gold charm engraved with the word "enough," a birthday gift from my mother years ago. It had never meant more than in that moment. "What if I touch my necklace like this?" I asked, holding it lightly between my fingers. "Could that be the cue?" Marcus nodded. "If you do that, I'll unmute his mic. Just know whatever he says goes straight to the whole room." I let out a slow breath. "That's exactly what I want." He didn't question it further. To him, it was a romantic surprise. To me, it was an escape hatch I should have built months ago. Driving home, the idea took full shape. I imagined Malik's voice echoing across the ballroom the same way it echoed across my private moments, unfiltered, unguarded, cruel in its confidence. I didn't want to destroy him, not exactly. I wanted him witnessed. I wanted his words, the ones he used like little knives, to finally hit him with the same force they hit me. Over the next few days, Malik slipped naturally back into his rhythm. Every time I requested clarity about a vendor or schedules or seating, he responded with that familiar refrain, "Don't start, T. You know I can walk away any time." He didn't even look at me when he said it. It was muscle memory for him now, as automatic as breathing. And every time he said it, the plan felt less like a risk and more like a necessity. One afternoon, Malik's cousin Keisha came to help finalize the seating chart. She watched me for a while, then said quietly, "You're different, not upset, just quieter." I looked at her, surprised she'd noticed. "Trying to keep the peace," I said. She shook her head. "No, it feels like you're saving your energy for something." I didn't confirm or deny it. But the softness in her voice reminded me that not everyone in his family enabled him. One person seeing me clearly was enough to keep me steady. A small scare came the day before the ceremony. Malik nearly overheard a conversation about the audio system between Marcus and a caterer. My heart hammered as he paused nearby, but he was too busy bragging about his suit to pay attention. It reminded me how fragile the plan was and how easily it could unravel if I wasn't careful. I felt my pulse racing, but also a strange steadiness beneath it. I wasn't acting out of impulse. I was acting out of survival. During the rehearsal, Marcus tested the mic quietly as Malik practiced leading me across the dance floor. Our eyes met across the room. He gave the slightest nod, a silent confirmation that he remembered the signal. My hand brushed my necklace reflexively, and he nodded again. Malik didn't notice. He was preoccupied with watching his reflection in the mirrored wall. When Malik pulled me into rehearsal position, he leaned close and whispered, "Try not to step on my shoes tomorrow. I swear, if you start messing things up, I'll walk right out." His tone was light, but the message was the same as always. In that moment, I realized I didn't even need to hope. He would give me the moment. He always did. That night, lying beside him while he scrolled through messages from his groomsmen, I finally understood something painful but true. My silence had protected him more than it had ever protected me. I had cushioned him from consequences, from witnesses, from accountability. I had allowed him to believe his words evaporated instead of landing somewhere. But tomorrow, they wouldn't evaporate. Tomorrow, they'd echo. As I closed my eyes, I pictured the ballroom, the guests, the music swelling around us. I pictured his mouth moving, the habitual whisper slipping out before he could stop it. And then I pictured touching my necklace, the signal passing invisibly across the room, the channel going live. Tomorrow, for the first time, he would hear what I'd been hearing alone. Tomorrow, the room would finally know the truth. The morning of the wedding felt strangely quiet inside me, as if all my nerves had drained away during the night and left only a calm, deliberate focus. My bridesmaids fluttered around the suite, adjusting my veil, touching up my makeup, fussing over last-minute details, but their voices were muffled, distant. Even the mirror seemed unsure of the woman standing before it. A woman who looked serene only because her decision had already been made. I kept touching the pendant at my throat, the gold warm against my skin, a reminder of the plan that had carried me through the last 48 hours. It wasn't revenge. It was truth. And today, truth would walk down the aisle with me. When Malik entered the room for our first look, his smile was wide, camera ready, a perfect groom's expression practiced on cue. He kissed my cheek as the photographer snapped pictures and whispered, "You look good. Don't get emotional out there." The tone, the slight edge beneath it, told me everything. Even today, even now, he couldn't hold back his favorite little threat. I simply nodded and let the moment pass. His arrogance was a steady gift. It kept confirming my choice. During the ceremony, he squeezed my hand a little too tightly whenever the pastor spoke about respect or partnership. His mother dabbed her eyes dramatically in the front row, certain she had raised a man any woman would be lucky to have. Danielle whispered jokes to the bridesmaid beside her, already planning captions for her posts. Only Keisha watched me closely, as if she sensed the quiet storm in my chest. When our vows were finished and the applause rolled through the crowd, Malik looked relieved, not touched, not moved, simply satisfied that we had performed correctly. But the true stage was the reception. As we entered the ballroom to cheers, Malik puffed his chest and waved at his uncles, already relishing his spotlight. I stayed a step behind him, my hand grazing the pendant at my throat, not yet, but close. The DJ mixed our entrance song, lights sweeping the room in soft gold and rose. Guests clapped, lifted glasses, and shouted congratulations. Everything looked exactly like Malik wanted. Elegant, polished, a celebration curated around his image. He had no idea that the room around him was a fuse waiting for a spark. When it was time for our first dance, he guided me to the center of the floor, not tenderly, but with the same confident grip he used when directing rehearsals. The crowd circled us, phones raised. The song began, slow, warm, emotional. Malik pulled me close, one hand on my back, the other clasping mine. To everyone watching, we were the perfect couple, swaying in a perfect moment. But I could feel the tension in his body, the impatience under his breath, the way he performed affection instead of feeling it. Halfway through the dance, he leaned in, lowering his voice just enough for what he thought would be privacy. "Try not to mess up my big moment," he murmured, a tiny laugh pressed against my ear. "I swear, Tiana, if you start acting up tonight, I'll leave you anyway." His breath warmed the side of my neck. My fingers tightened on my necklace. Across the ballroom, Marcus looked up from the DJ booth. Our eyes met. He recognized the cue immediately. With a quiet, swift gesture, he pushed the channel live. Malik kept talking, unaware. "Don't start any drama. Don't ruin this. It's not that hard." He chuckled softly. the same low, taunting sound he'd used to cut me down behind closed doors so many times. Then his laugh echoed, not in my ear, across the entire ballroom. Every speaker in the venue carried his voice, sharp, smug, unmistakably cruel. The music faltered as Marcus lowered the track, letting Malik's words ring clearly. A stunned silence rippled through the crowd. Guests froze. Forks paused midair. Heads turned like a chorus snapping to attention. You could feel the shift, admiration collapsing into shock in a single breath. Malik stiffened and slowly pulled back, confusion flickering across his face, as if he couldn't believe the whole room had just heard what he thought was whispered power. Then the last line looped in the stunned air. "I'll leave you anyway." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in raw, visceral disbelief. His mother gasped so loudly her chair scraped against the floor. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with mortification rather than sympathy. Several women at the front table exchanged looks of disgust. A few men shook their heads, whispering to each other. Someone near the back muttered, "On their wedding day?" Keisha didn't gasp. She closed her eyes, not shocked, relieved. Finally, someone besides her could see him. Malik's face went pale, then blotchy red. That's not the mic. He stammered, looking around wildly, searching for a version of reality where the room would believe him instead of what they'd heard. But the audio had been crisp, undeniable, the tone unmistakably his. Even his mother couldn't conjure a defense. "You were joking?" someone echoed skeptically. "You talked to her like that?" another asked from a nearby table. The room became a mirror reflecting him, and for the first time, he had nowhere to look but at himself. He reached for my hand, panicked now. "Tiana, baby, you know how I talk. They don't understand. Don't make this into something." His voice shook, cracks appearing in the confidence he wore like armor. But today wasn't about performance. It was about truth. I stepped back just enough that his fingers slipped from mine. The movement was small, quiet, but it cut deeper than shouting ever could. Around us, guests murmured, some standing, others staring with open disappointment. Even the photographer had lowered his camera, as if documenting this moment would be indecent. Malik swallowed hard, trying to gather himself. "Turn it off," he hissed toward the booth. "Turn the damn thing off." But Marcus didn't move. He simply watched, understanding finally what the recording had been meant to reveal. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at Malik, at the man who'd made cruelty a habit and expected applause for it. His facade crumbled in real time. He tried to laugh it off, waving his hands weakly. "Come on, y'all know how relationships are. It's just jokes, private jokes." But no one laughed. The silence that followed wasn't neutral, it was judgment. And in that silence, I felt something shift inside me, something release. For years, I had been the only witness to the way he spoke to me. Now the entire room had become the witness. Malik stepped toward me again, pleading now. "Tiana, please, fix this. You're making me look." I lifted my chin and met his eyes. "You did that yourself." He froze as if the ground beneath him had cracked. The ballroom watched the man who had always believed he could walk away any time suddenly realize he might be the one left standing alone. His mother finally rose from her seat, her voice trembling as she tried to call his name. Danielle stared, stunned, unable to spin this moment into something flattering. And I stood there in the center of the floor, not triumphant, not gloating, simply free. The moment Malik's voice died out across the speakers, something inside me unclenched for the first time in years. Not because I'd humiliated him, but because the truth no longer lived inside only me. I had carried his words like stones in my pockets, pretending the weight was normal. Now, in one echo, the stones were on the floor where everyone could see them. The ballroom felt impossibly still, as though the air itself was recalibrating after hearing what had always been said behind closed doors. Malik stood in front of me, stripped of his confidence, his expression flickering between anger, panic, and disbelief. He had never imagined a world where his words would face witnesses. His entire identity rested on the assumption that he controlled the narrative, that he controlled me. Now, with one slip of audio and a single touch of my necklace, the illusion had ruptured. Around us, guests began murmuring. Soft at first, then louder as people made sense of what they'd heard. A woman near the center table shook her head, whispering to her husband. An older uncle muttered, "Not on their wedding day," as if the timing were the issue, not the behavior. A pair of Malik's co-workers exchanged looks, realizing the polished charm he displayed in the office wasn't the whole story. Some guests looked embarrassed to have celebrated him. Others looked furious that they'd applauded a man who treated his partner like a threat that needed managing. And then the whispers shifted away from him toward me. She didn't react at all. Imagine how long she's been hearing that. She planned this, and honestly, good for her. Hearing their words didn't make me smug. It made me ache. Ache for all the times I'd swallowed disrespect to protect someone who never returned the favor. Ache for every moment I'd smiled through discomfort, every joke I'd let pass because creating friction felt dangerous. And most of all, ache for the version of me who believed silence kept the peace, when really it only fed the people who depended on it. I took a slow breath and realized something painful. My silence had never been weakness. It had been self-preservation. But over time, survival can start to look like surrender, and those who benefit from your quiet begin to think they're safe inside it. Malik mistook my silence for permission. His family mistook it for acceptance. The silence itself slowly became a prison, built one comment, one joke, one threat at a time. That prison collapsed today. Malik reached for me again, desperate now, not suave, not charming, almost frantic. "Tiana, listen, please, it wasn't like that. You know I say things I don't mean when I'm stressed. Baby, please, don't do this to me." He looked around, lowering his voice as if he could still salvage some dignity. "Let's talk privately." But privacy was exactly where he thrived. Privacy was where he'd sharpened those words into weapons and slipped them into conversations like tests I always failed. Privacy had protected him, not me. I stepped back another inch, and the subtle rejection hit him harder than any confrontation could. His mother pushed her way to the dance floor, eyes wide with indignation. "Tiana, sweetheart, you must understand. Malik jokes. He didn't mean." "He meant every word," I said quietly. The softness of my voice made her freeze. She blinked, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Beside her, Danielle stood stiff, arms crossed, face pale. For once, she had nothing clever to say. She had laughed when Malik mocked me. She had encouraged the dynamic that fed him. Now the joke had become evidence, and her expression revealed the deepest truth. She wasn't shocked by what he'd said. She was shocked that anyone else heard it. Keisha reached me first. She didn't speak. She just placed her hand on my back, steady and warm, as if silently telling me I wasn't crazy for wanting something better than the version of love Malik offered. That touch alone almost undid me. For years, I had mistaken survival for loyalty. Finally, someone saw the difference. Malik's knees buckled slightly as more relatives and friends approached. Their questions weren't gentle. "You talk to your wife like that? How long have you been saying things like this? You embarrassed her and you're asking her to calm down?" He tried to defend himself, but each excuse collapsed before he finished speaking. It was a joke dissolved under the weight of repetition. "She knows I don't mean it" sounded pathetic when surrounded by witnesses. "She's making this worse than it is" landed like a confession instead of a defense. His face twisted with something unfamiliar to him, accountability. I stepped aside, letting him face the storm alone. This wasn't revenge. This was truth finally having room to breathe. Malik wasn't just fighting for dignity. He was fighting the collapse of a version of himself he'd spent years performing. Without the performance, he looked small, lost, almost childlike in his panic. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for softening the blow. As I walked toward the edge of the dance floor, guests parted instinctively, creating a path for me. I wasn't triumphant, but I wasn't broken. I felt something quieter, more powerful, release. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts clearly, without Malik's voice drowning them out. In the corridor outside the ballroom, I stood alone for a moment, hands trembling slightly as adrenaline faded. I thought about every moment I had stayed silent. Moments when speaking up would have cost me more than I could bear at the time. Silence had kept me safe when I thought conflict would destroy me. Silence had shielded me from his anger, but it had also shielded him from consequences. I finally understood the real cost: my peace, my confidence, my sense of worth. But now, the silence was mine again, not imposed, not fearful, but chosen, and it was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. Behind me, the ballroom erupted in arguments, Malik trying to regain control while his family scrambled to defend him. His voice rose, strained and hollow, pleading with relatives, blaming miscommunication, accusing the DJ, anyone but himself. But the room wasn't buying it. You can't unhear the truth once it's spoken aloud. Guests were already pulling out their phones, whispering, recording the fallout. Malik's carefully curated reputation, the charming fiancé, the confident leader, the golden son, was cracking faster than he could patch it. Even the family members who had enabled him now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the man the room had just heard him be. That was the final stage of his downfall, the realization that loyalty built on image evaporates the moment the image collapses. I stepped out into the evening air, cool and clean, as if the world itself had shifted. The silence wrapped around me softly, not heavy like before, not suffocating, but cleansing. I could almost hear my younger self whispering, "You deserved to be heard." For years, I had feared being alone more than being mistreated. Now, standing there, I realized solitude wasn't a punishment. It was a return to myself, to my voice, to the instincts I had ignored in the name of love. I had walked into that ballroom carrying doubt and shame. I walked out carrying truth. And even though the wedding had shattered, even though Malik's family would never forgive me for making them witnesses, I didn't feel regret. I felt alignment, the first true alignment between the voice inside me and the actions I finally took. Silence had once been the cage he kept me in. Now it was the boundary he would never cross again. I wasn't leaving the venue broken. I was leaving whole,